Alright, so there's a lot of words you may need to know for ecology. There's a huge list of them, and ecology really comes down to whether or not you know the vocab. There's a lot of specialized words that describe organisms and how they interact with one another to form an ecosystem. Like, here's a list of some of the words that you may need to know. You may need to know all of them, but we're going to jump into all of them right now. First one is autotroph. An autotroph has the word auto in it, meaning the food's going to be automatically made for these organisms. And when we talk about autotrophs, we're talking about algae, certain types of bacteria, and plants that can capture energy from sunlight or chemicals and convert it into forms that living cells can use. What that means is when plants use photosynthesis, they're going to make their own food. All right? They're going to make those sugars that they need so they can grow and do everything else they need to do. They do it automatically. It's done automatically. It's done from the sun. Humans, we're not autotrophs, we're heterotrophs, which we'll get into. When we get hungry, we can't just stand in the sun and hope to make the energy we need. Primary producers. Now, primary means first, and when we have primary producers, we're talking about right down here at the very bottom of a food pyramid. Now, they are the first producers of energy-rich compounds that are later used by other organisms. In other words, they are autotrophs. They make their own food. Because they make their own food, we can eat them and get some of the energy that they have. Next word is photosynthesis. You may be familiar with photosynthesis. Captures light energy, that is the sun's light, and uses it to power chemical reactions that convert carbon dioxide and water into oxygen and energy-rich carbohydrates such as sugars and starches. This is how autotrophs get their quote-unquote food. So you have the plants, they make sugars, and that's what they use for their energy source. During photosynthesis, they give off oxygen as a byproduct. Now, during cellular respiration, they also give off carbon dioxide, and we'll talk about that when we get to that word. Okay, next one is chemosynthesis. This one you may not be familiar with. It's just like photosynthesis, except for instead of using the sun's light, they use chemical energy. All right, right here we have hydrogen sulfide coming out of the vents in the ocean floor. So all these autotrophs down here, they're going to use the hydrogen sulfide and they're going to convert that chemical energy to make their own carbohydrates. So it's a process in which organisms, instead of using solar energy, they use chemical energy to produce carbohydrates. All right, consumers. So we're done with producers. Now we got to talk about consumers, and there's different levels. Consumers are organisms that rely on other organisms for energy and nutrients. For example, heterotrophs are consumers. So here we have the primary consumer. They're the first consumers that eat the producers. Then we have secondary consumers. They eat the primary consumers. And then we have the tertiary consumers, who eat the secondary consumers. So that's why we have primary, secondary, and tertiary. It tells you where in the pyramid they are and what exactly they're eating based on the levels. All right, let's talk about heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are consumers. They're consumers. They eat other organisms for food. It's almost the same thing as a consumer. It is the same thing as a consumer. Consumers are heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are consumers. So let's talk about carnivores. Carnivores eat meat. Carnivores are a type of consumer. They are a type of heterotroph. Now, a carnivore doesn't just eat other animals. It kills and eats other animals. Now, a herbivore, lots of people have heard of, and your teacher may have told you, hey, a herbivore eats plants. Well, that's part of it. That's not all of it. Herbivores also eat plants. They eat plant leaves. They eat the roots of a plant, seeds, and or fruits. So they either eat a combination of these things, one of them, or all of them. That's what we're talking about when we talk about herbivores. They're not eating meat. They're eating plant leaves, roots, seeds, or fruits. Omnivores. Now, an omnivore is like a combination of a herbivore and a carnivore. They don't just eat meat. They just don't eat plants, plant leaves, roots, fruits, or seeds. That's the one I forgot. They eat a combination of both. Their diets naturally consist of plants and animals. So here we have herbivores. All these things right here, all these organisms are eating plants. Here we have carnivores. They're all eating meat. And here we have omnivores. Now you might be saying, how can a rooster eat meat? I thought a rooster just eats seed. Roosters sometimes eat worms, so that's why they're considered an omnivore. Okay, they feed off both plants and animals. Then people, of course, we eat plants and animals, bears, pigs, and so on and so on and so on. All right, scavengers. Now, a scavenger is similar to a carnivore, but there's one big difference. They're animals that consume the carcasses of other animals that have been killed by predators or have died of other causes. So they're not hunting these animals down. They're going to feast on the dead bodies of those animals. So let's say a lion is eating something and he doesn't finish it all the way. That's fine. The scavengers are going to come in and pick up right where the lion left off. All right, let's do decomposers. Decomposers are bacteria and fungi that feed, and I put that in quotes because they don't actually eat anything, but they do break down organic matter. And they break it down by using powerful enzymes, and the powerful enzymes will break down that matter. Then we have detritivores. These are like millipedes, worms, centipedes, dung beetles. Those are some examples. Now, they don't break down the decaying organic matter. They actually eat the decaying organisms. They eat the waste of other organisms. And that's what we're talking about. When we say they eat the waste of other organisms, we're talking about the dung. That's what they're talking about, and that's why they have things called the dung beetle. So decomposers break down organic matter. Detritivores actually eat decaying organisms and the waste of organisms. Then we have a food web, which is a graphical presentation of what eats what in an ecosystem. For example, we have all these arrows going on here, and all these arrows mean something. For example, let's take a look at this emperor penguin. When I follow the arrow of the emperor penguin, I see there's an arrow pointing from the emperor penguin to the killer whale. This tells me the killer whale eats the emperor penguin. The emperor penguin, you can think of it like this, goes inside the whale of a killer's stomach. Here we have a crab-eater seal. The arrow is going to the leopard seal. The crab-eater seal, you can think of going into the stomach of the leopard seal. Here we have some krill. Krill are eaten by squid. They are eaten by the emperor penguin. They are eaten by the crab-eater penguin. They're eaten by fish, the humpback whale, and some other things on here. So all you got to do is follow the arrow. The humpback whale eats fish and eats the krill. You can follow the arrow to find out what eats what. Then we have a trophic level. Now each step in a food chain or food web is a trophic level. Down here at the bottom where we have the primary producers, that is a trophic level. Here where we have the herbivores, that is a trophic level. Here where we have the primary carnivores, that is a trophic level. Here where we have the secondary carnivores, that's a trophic level as well. They are illustrated in an ecological pyramid. Now you might be saying, well, what is that? Good question. Let's talk about it. An ecological pyramid shows the amount of energy or matter within each trophic level in a food chain or food web. So here we can see we have consumers and we have producers. Producers are at the bottom. Now take a look at these numbers. You notice as we move up each trophic level, only 10% is gained. So here the primary consumer is feeding on the producer. The number goes from 100% to 10%. That's because 10% of the energy is transferred. The rest is given off as heat. And when the organism uses that food to grow and break down the food, that's where the other energy is used for. But most of it is given off as heat. So here we have 100%. Here goes 10. Well, what's 10% of 100? 1%. What's 10% of that is 1/10%, and then 100%. So only really 10% of the energy is transferred. The rest is given off as heat. Then we have biomass. Biomass is the total amount of living tissue within a trophic level. So right here, we have our autotrophs, which are plants. They use photosynthesis, and it has 1,200 kilograms per meter squared per year. If I look down here at the key, I have my key right here, and then it shows everything in the ecosystem, and it's going to tell me how much living tissue is in each trophic level. Each trophic level, I should say. Then we have the biogeochemical cycle, and we're almost done. We only have 5 slides after this. So the biogeochemical cycle, elements pass from one organism to another through biological processes, geological processes, and chemical processes. The biogeochemical cycle recycles that matter. The matter is not created or destroyed. It's just transformed. And the best way to think of this is the water cycle. Okay? Water falls. It rains. Later, it will evaporate. Condensation, the water vapor, changes in the clouds. The clouds become saturated, and the precipitation falls. The water falls out of the clouds back to the ground. Here, trees, plants, Other organisms use the water in their roots. It goes out through the roots and evaporates, and that's what we call transpiration. And transpiration is just like evaporation. Instead of the water evaporating out of the ground or off the surface of the earth or the ocean or wherever it's coming from, it's coming strictly through plants. Then we have transpiration, which we just talked about. It's evaporation of water from plant leaves. The plant converts the liquid water to vapor, and the vapor escapes through the leaves. So that's what's happening here with these guard cells. And we'll talk more about this later this year. All right, the law of conservation of matter. Matter is neither destroyed or created. It's only transformed. And the best way to remember this is think of ice to water and water to a gas when you apply heat. So you have an ice cube. When you add heat, the matter is not destroyed. You're not creating anything. It's just transforming from a solid to a liquid. If you add more heat, there's no matter being created or destroyed. It's just changing from a liquid to a gas. Then we have the law of conservation of energy. Energy is neither destroyed or created, only transformed. So here's a guy getting punched in the face rather hard, and you can see they stopped it at the right moment or used a freeze frame to capture it at the right moment. There's a lot of potential energy when the guy was resting his fist at his side. When he moved forward, that energy was not being created. The energy transformed from potential energy to kinetic energy. That energy hit this guy right here, and you can see the energy being traveling throughout his mouth as he got punched. So anything at rest has potential energy. It's not like the energy came from this guy's hand and transferred to this guy's face. It had potential energy. He's just moving it to become kinetic energy, and when his face stops moving, it'll go back to potential energy. The best thing to remember here is energy, just like matter, it's not destroyed or created. It can only be transformed. Then we have combustion, and this is another example of the conservation of matter. All right? Combustion is a way in which carbon returns to the atmosphere. It's done by burning fossil fuels, hence the name combustion. When we burn fossil fuels, there's energy stored in those fossil fuels. When we burn them, that energy is released, and that's what powers our electricity, or mostly here in Central Florida. We burn a lot of fossil fuels, a lot of oil. It is transformed, and the waste product is given off as carbon dioxide. There has to be waste given off. There are things that are not used, and that's the carbon dioxide. And that's how carbon is recycled back to the atmosphere. Then you have these plants. They're going to take in that carbon dioxide and give off oxygen. And the plants are going to give off carbon dioxide too. And let's talk about that now. And that is cell respiration. It takes place in the cells of organisms to convert biochemical energy from nutrients, that being glucose, into adenosine triphosphate, ATP, and then released waste products. So here we have the glucose, all right, that's being combined with oxygen. These are our reactants. The products are going to be carbon dioxide. That's going to be given back into the atmosphere. Water is going to be given off, and energy, which is the ATP. So plants take in carbon dioxide and give off oxygen. During cell respiration, they give off carbon dioxide. But the amount of carbon dioxide they give off is not nearly equivalent to the amount of carbon dioxide they take in. We give off carbon dioxide. When we breathe in deep, our blood becomes oxygenated. We don't even have to breathe in deep. When we breathe, it becomes oxygenated. It travels out through our body. That oxygen is delivered to cells. The cells release that carbon dioxide back into our blood. The blood travels back to our heart. That carbon dioxide enters our lungs, and we exhale, and we get rid of that carbon dioxide, and it goes right back into the atmosphere. So that's it for Ecology List 1. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email.